The alarm bells rang through the corridors of the UES Defiance like angry metal birds. Red lights flashed on every wall, painting the long hallways in colors of blood and warning. Soldiers ran past carrying weapons and shouting orders to each other. Their heavy boots made thunder sounds on the metal floors. Lee Soo-jin pushed her cleaning cart to the side and waited. She had learned long ago that when the fighting men needed to move, the cleaning woman should stay out of their way. The cart wheels squeaked a little as she moved it against the wall. One of the wheels was getting old, but she had not asked for a new cart yet. There were more important things for the ship to spend money on. She was 42 years old and had been cleaning spaceships for 15 years. Her black hair was always pulled back in a simple tie, and her blue work clothes were always clean but never new. Most people on the ship did not know her name. They saw her every day. But she was like the air vents or the lights on the ceiling. Always there, always working, but never really noticed. The last soldier ran past her. His face was young and scared. Soo-jin watched him go and remembered another young face from long ago. Her brother Tae-ho had looked just like that when the first Kalari ships attacked their home colony. He had been 19 then, working in the communication center when the aliens came down from the sky with their silver ships and energy weapons. Tae-ho had died trying to send a warning to other colonies. The Kalari had killed him with the rest of the communication workers, but not before he saved thousands of people on other worlds. Soo-jin had found out about his death 3 weeks later when the refugee ship finally reached Earth. She started pushing her cart again. The wheels made their familiar squeaking sound as she moved down the empty corridor. The ship was heading toward another battle with the Kalari Empire. It had been going on for 7 years now, this war between humans and the tall gray aliens. With their cold eyes and strange technology, most humans hated the Kalari. They were easy to hate. They had started the war by attacking human colonies without warning. They killed civilians and took prisoners for their slave labor camps. Their ships were faster and their weapons were stronger than anything humans had built. But humans had something the Kalari did not understand. They had the belief that every person mattered, no matter what job they did. A janitor was just as important as a captain. A cook was just as valuable as a weapons officer. This was something the Kalari could never understand, because their society was built on the idea that some people were born to rule and others were born to serve. Soo-jin reached the waste processing section in the lower part of the ship. This was her main workplace, down in the belly of the Defiance, where the air recycling systems hummed and the water purification machines worked day and night. It was not a pretty place, but it was necessary. Without these systems, everyone on the ship would die in less than a week. She had learned every pipe, every filter, every recycling unit in this section. She knew which machines made noise when they needed maintenance and which ones ran silent until they broke down completely. She could fix most problems herself with simple tools and spare parts. The engineering officers were always surprised when they came down here and found that she had already solved problems they did not even know existed. The ship shook suddenly. The battle had started. Soo-jin held onto her cart and listened to the sounds around her. The main engines were running at full power. She could hear it in the vibrations that traveled through the metal floors and walls. The weapon systems were charging up too. That made a different kind of vibration, higher and sharper. She continued her work. The waste processing systems could not stop working just because there was a battle going on. If anything, they needed to work better during fights. Stressed people used more water and created more waste. The air recycling systems had to work harder when people were breathing fast from fear and excitement. 20 minutes later, the ship shook again, harder this time. Something had hit them. Soo-jin looked up at the pipes above her head and saw a small drop of water forming where two sections joined together. The impact had loosened something. She climbed up on a maintenance ladder and looked at the joint more closely. It was not dangerous yet, but if it got worse during the battle, it could become a real problem. Water leaks in space were always serious. Every drop was precious, and losing too much could mean death for everyone. Soo-jin opened her tool bag and found the right wrench. She tightened the joint carefully, making sure not to over-tighten it and crack the pipe. As she worked, she could hear the weapon systems firing above her. The whole ship vibrated with each shot. When she finished with the pipe, she climbed back down and continued checking the other systems. Everything looked normal. The recycling units were working perfectly. The air filters were clean. The waste processing machines were breaking down organic matter and turning it into fertilizer for the ship's food gardens. The battle sounds stopped suddenly. Either the Defiance had won or the enemy had retreated, or both sides had decided to fight another day. Sujin had stopped trying to figure out which battles were important and which ones were not. To her, every day the ship kept working was a victory. She was checking the water purification system when Captain Park Dongwoo came down to her section. He was a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes. He had been fighting this war for 6 years, and it showed in the way he walked and talked. "Sujin," he said, nodding to her. "How are the systems running?" "All good, Captain," she replied. "I fixed a small leak in Section 7. Everything else is working fine." The captain looked around at the machines and pipes that kept his ship alive. He was one of the few officers who understood how important this place was. "Thank you," he said. "I know this is not exciting work, but it matters. We could not fight without people like you." Sujin smiled. "Every job matters, Captain. That is what makes us human." Captain Park nodded and walked back toward the upper levels of the ship. Sujin watched him go, then returned to her work. Tomorrow there would be another battle, and she would be here, making sure the ship kept working. She did not know that in 3 weeks her understanding of what it meant to be human would be tested in ways she could never imagine. 3 days after the battle, the UES Defiance caught a Kalari scout ship trying to escape through an asteroid field. The alien ship was small and fast, but it had been damaged in an earlier fight. When the human weapons hit its engines, the Kalari vessel stopped moving and sent a surrender signal. Captain Park ordered his Marines to board the enemy's ship. They found 12 Kalari crew members inside, all still alive, but some badly hurt. The Marines brought the prisoners to the detention section of the Defiance, where they would stay until the ship reached a prisoner exchange station. Sujin was told to clean and maintain the detention area. It was not her usual job, but the regular cleaning crew was busy repairing damage from the recent battle. She did not mind the extra work. Cleaning was cleaning, whether it was waste processing systems or prison cells. The detention section was on Deck 5, far from the important parts of the ship. The cells were small but clean, with basic beds and washing facilities. Each cell had thick metal bars and an energy field that could stop anyone from escaping. The area smelled like metal and recycled air. When Sujin arrived with her cleaning supplies, she saw the Kalari prisoners for the first time in her life. She had seen pictures and videos before, but meeting them face to face was different. They were taller than humans, with gray skin and large dark eyes. Their faces were narrow, and their fingers were longer than human fingers. They wore simple, prison clothes instead of their usual black uniforms. Most of the prisoners sat quietly in their cells. They watched her with careful eyes as she began cleaning the corridor outside their cells. Sujin had expected them to look dangerous or evil, like the pictures in human propaganda videos. Instead, they looked tired and worried. In the last cell, she saw something that surprised her. One of the prisoners was much younger than the others. He looked like he might be 16 or 17 years old by human standards. His gray skin was paler than the adult Kalari, and his dark eyes held the expression she recognized. It was the same look of fear and sadness that her brother Taeho had worn during the first alien attacks. The young Kalari was sitting on his bed with his back against the wall. His clothes were torn and dirty, and he had a bandage around his left arm. He watched Sujin clean the floor in front of his cell, but he did not say anything. The adult Kalari in the next cell was clearly the young one's father. He had the same narrow face and the same way of holding his head. This older Kalari wore the remains of an officer's uniform, and Sujin could see rank marks that had been partially torn off. He watched her work with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. As she cleaned, Sujin listened to the guards talking. The older Kalari was Commander Veltar, and the young one was his son Kilren. They had been serving together on the scout ship when it was captured. The son had been working as a communications officer, learning his father's trade. Soo-jin finished cleaning the corridor and began checking the cells themselves. The detention regulations said she had to clean each cell once every 2 days and make sure all the facilities were working properly. The guards watched her carefully as she worked, but they did not try to stop her from doing her job. When she reached the young Kalari's cell, she noticed that his food tray was still full. The prison food was not very good, but it was healthy, and there was enough of it. Most prisoners ate everything they were given because they did not know when they might get more food. Soo-jin looked at the young alien more carefully. His breathing was shallow and his skin looked too pale even for a Kalari. She had seen enough sick people to recognize the signs. This boy was not just scared or sad. He was actually ill. She finished cleaning his cell and moved on to the next one, but she kept thinking about the young Kalari. When she cleaned Commander Veltar's cell, she noticed that he was watching his son with the same worried expression that human parents wore when their children were sick. The next day, Soo-jin returned to clean the detention area again. The young Kalari looked worse than before. His food tray was still untouched and he was lying on his bed instead of sitting up. His father was standing at the front of his cell trying to get the guards' attention. "My son needs medical help," Commander Veltar said in broken human language. His accent was thick, but Soo-jin could understand him. "He has injury inside. Getting worse." The guards ignored him. They had been told that Kalari prisoners sometimes faked illness to try to escape. They were not allowed to call for medical help unless a prisoner was dying. Soo-jin watched the young Kalari as she cleaned. His breathing was getting more difficult, and he kept holding his side like something hurt inside. She recognized internal injuries when she saw them. Her brother had looked the same way after falling from a construction platform when they were children. That evening, Soo-jin made a decision that went against all the rules. She took an extra food ration from the crew kitchen and brought it to the detention area. When the guards were not looking, she slipped it through the bars of the young Kalari's cell. Kilren looked up at her with surprise. He tried to sit up, but moving clearly caused him pain. Soo-jin pointed at the food and then at him, trying to tell him without words that he needed to eat to get stronger. The young alien looked at the food, then at her face, then at the food again. Slowly, he reached out and took the ration package. His long fingers shook a little as he opened it. Commander Veltar had been watching this exchange. He moved closer to the front of his cell and looked directly at Soo-jin. "Why?" he asked in his careful human words. "Why help enemy?" Soo-jin looked at the young Kalari, who was trying to eat small bites of the food she had brought. She thought about her brother Tai-ho and how young he had been when he died. She thought about all the young human soldiers she had seen on the ship, scared and far from home. "Not enemy," she said quietly. "Just young person who is hurt." Commander Veltar stared at her for a long moment. Something changed in his expression. The hardness around his eyes softened just a little. He nodded once, very slowly. From that day forward, Soo-jin began bringing extra food and medical supplies to the young Kalari whenever she could do it safely. She never spoke to either prisoner again, but her actions spoke louder than words. Commander Veltar watched everything she did. He began to understand that this human female was different from what he had been taught about human nature. She was showing kindness to his son for no reason, except that it was the right thing to do. Neither Soo-jin nor the Kalari commander knew that this small act of mercy would soon change all of their lives forever. 3 weeks had passed since the Kalari prisoners came aboard the Defiance. The ship was traveling toward a neutral station where prisoner exchanges happened. It was supposed to be a peaceful journey, but in this war, nothing stayed peaceful for long. Soo-jin was cleaning the water recycling systems when the attack began. She heard the emergency alarms first, then felt the ship shake as something hit the hull. But this was different from normal attacks. The impacts were small and precise, not like the heavy weapons fire she was used to hearing. Above her, she could hear soldiers running and shouting. The intercom crackled to life with Captain Park's voice. "All hands to battle stations. We are under attack by unknown enemy vessels. This is not a drill." Soo-jin stopped her work and listened carefully. The ship's engines were running at full power, but they were not trying to escape. The weapon systems were charging up, but they were not firing yet. Something strange was happening. Then she heard a sound she had never heard before. It was like metal being torn apart, but quiet and controlled. The sound came from somewhere above her, in the main hull sections. Someone was cutting through the ship's armor. The realization hit her like cold water. The Kalari were not trying to destroy the Defiance. They were trying to get inside it. This was a rescue mission, and they were coming for their captured people. The ship shook again, harder this time. More cutting sounds echoed through the walls. The enemy had brought some kind of special ship that could get through the Defiance's shields and armor. Sujin had heard rumors about Kalari phantom ships that could phase through solid matter, but she had never believed the stories. Above her, the sounds of fighting began. Energy weapons discharged with sharp crackling noises. Human projectile weapons answered with rapid pounding sounds. Men shouted orders and battle cries. The corridor floors rang with the sound of running boots. Sujin stayed in the lower sections and continued listening. The battle was moving through the ship level by level. The Kalari boarding parties were heading toward the detention area where their people were being held. The human Marines were trying to stop them, but the aliens seemed to know exactly where they were going. Then something went wrong. A massive explosion shook the entire ship. This was not weapons fire. Something had blown up inside the Defiance itself, probably in the engine sections. The lights flickered and went out for a moment before the emergency power came on. In the red emergency lighting, Sujin saw something that made her heart stop. Water was dripping from a pipe joint above her head. Not just a few drops like before, but a steady stream. The explosion had damaged something important in the ship's main systems. She grabbed her tools and climbed up to check the pipe more closely. What she found was worse than she had feared. The explosion had cracked the main water circulation system in 3 places. Water was pouring into the lower sections of the ship, and it would soon reach the electrical systems. But that was not the worst part. The explosion had also damaged the life support junction that controlled air circulation for the entire ship. Sujin could see the damage from where she stood. Broken pipes and severed cables hung from the ceiling like mechanical intestines. She climbed down and checked her portable scanner. The air quality readings were already getting worse. Without the main life support systems, everyone on the ship would start having trouble breathing within 20 minutes. In 30 minutes, they would all be dead. Sujin looked around the maintenance area. She was the only person on the ship who knew these systems well enough to fix them quickly. The engineering officers were good at their jobs, but they worked with computers and control panels. She worked with pipes and valves and the physical parts that kept everything running. The life support junction was located in the deepest part of the ship, past the detention areas and through a maze of maintenance tunnels that most people did not even know existed. To reach it, she would have to travel through sections where the fighting was happening. Sujin gathered her tools and started moving toward the upper levels. She could hear the battle getting worse as more Kalari soldiers made it inside the ship. Energy weapons lit up the corridors with blue and green flashes. The air smelled like burned metal and ozone. She reached the main corridor that led to the detention section. Here she could see the real damage from the explosion. Part of the ceiling had collapsed, blocking the normal route to the life support systems. She would have to find another way. Sujin remembered a maintenance tunnel that ran parallel to the main corridor. It was narrow and uncomfortable, but it would get her past the collapsed area. She opened a maintenance hatch and crawled inside. The tunnel was dark and filled with the sound of battle from the corridor next to it. As she crawled forward, she could hear human and Kalari voices shouting at each other. Sometimes energy bolts burned through the thin wall, missing her by inches. She was halfway through the tunnel when she heard a different sound. Someone was crying, not the angry shouting of soldiers, but the quiet crying of someone who was hurt and alone. Sujin stopped crawling and listened carefully. The sound was coming from below her in a section where the explosion had torn open the floor. Someone had fallen through and was trapped in the damaged area. She found a hole in the tunnel floor and looked down. In the red emergency lighting, she could see a figure lying among twisted metal and broken pipes. It was the young Kalari, Kilren. He must have been moved from his cell when the rescue started. But the explosion had separated him from everyone else. The boy was badly hurt. His leg was bent at a wrong angle, and there was blood on his face. He was conscious, but barely. When he saw Sujin looking down at him, his eyes went wide with surprise. Sujin looked at the damage around the young alien. He was trapped by a heavy piece of metal that had fallen across his chest. Even if she could get down there, she was not strong enough to move it by herself. She looked at her watch. 15 minutes until the air became dangerous. 25 minutes until everyone on the ship would be dead, including this young Kalari, who had never wanted to be part of this war. Sujin made her choice. She could not save everyone if she stopped to help one person, but she could not leave a hurt child to die alone in the dark, even if that child was supposed to be her enemy. She began looking for a way to climb down to where Kilren was trapped, knowing that every second she spent here brought death closer to everyone on the ship. Sujin found a broken maintenance ladder and climbed down to where Kilren was trapped. The young Kalari's breathing was shallow and painful. Blood ran from a cut on his forehead, and his left leg was definitely broken. The heavy metal beam across his chest was keeping him pinned to the floor. "Help," he whispered when he saw her. His voice was weak, and she could tell he was going into shock from his injuries. Sujin opened her emergency medical kit and pulled out the basic supplies she always carried. She had learned first aid during her years working on spaceships because accidents happened and help was not always nearby. She cleaned the cut on his head and checked his vital signs. The boy's pulse was too fast and too weak. His skin was cold and pale, even for a Kalari. She could see that he had internal bleeding, probably from broken ribs. Without proper medical treatment, he would die within the hour. But first, she had to get him free from the metal beam. Sujin looked around the damaged area and found a hydraulic jack that had fallen from a repair kit. It was small, but powerful, designed for lifting heavy ship parts during maintenance work. She positioned it carefully under the metal beam and began pumping the handle. Slowly, the beam rose just enough for Kilren to breathe more easily. She could not lift it completely, but she could make space to pull him out. Working carefully, she grabbed the young Kalari under his arms and pulled him away from the trapped position. Kilren cried out in pain as she moved him, but he did not fight her. When she had him in a safer position, she used her medical supplies to stabilize his broken leg and wrap his injured ribs. It was not perfect treatment, but it would keep him alive for a while longer. "Why?" Kilren asked her in broken human language. His dark eyes were filled with pain and confusion. "Why help me? I am enemy." Sujin looked at his young face and saw her brother Taeho again. "You are not my enemy," she said quietly. "You are just a child who got hurt in a stupid war." She checked her watch. 8 minutes had passed since the life support systems failed. She had 17 minutes left to reach the life support junction and fix the damage. But now she had to carry an injured alien through maintenance tunnels and collapsed corridors. Sujin made a simple stretcher from broken metal pieces and cloth from her cleaning supplies. She carefully moved Kilren onto it and began pulling him through the narrow spaces toward the life support area. The boy was not heavy, but moving him through tight tunnels was slow and difficult work. As they traveled, the sounds of battle continued. Above them, energy weapons fired and metal rang against metal. She could hear human voices shouting orders and Kalari voices answering in their own language. The rescue mission was still going on, but it sounded like both sides were taking heavy losses. 10 more minutes passed before they reached the area near the life support junction. Sujin was exhausted from pulling the stretcher, and Kilren was unconscious from pain and blood loss. She had 7 minutes left to fix the systems that kept everyone alive. The life support junction was behind a heavy metal door marked with radiation warning signs. Sujin knew why those signs were there. The explosion had damaged more than just the air circulation system. It had also cracked the radiation shielding around the ship's power systems. She opened the door and looked inside. The junction room was filled with broken pipes, severed cables, and sparking electrical connections. In the center of the room, she could see the main control panel that operated the life support systems for the entire ship. Her radiation detector began clicking rapidly as soon as she pointed it into the room. The radiation levels were already dangerous. Anyone who went into that room would absorb a lethal dose within minutes. Sujin looked back at Kilren, who was lying unconscious on the stretcher. If she went into the radiation zone to fix the life support systems, she would die, but if she did not go in, everyone on the ship would die, including this young alien who had never chosen to be part of this war. She thought about her brother Tae-ho and how he had died trying to save people he had never met. She thought about Captain Park and all the human crew members who had families waiting for them at home. She thought about Commander Veltar and the other Kalari prisoners who were probably fighting for their lives somewhere above. Kilren opened his eyes and saw her standing at the entrance to the radiation zone. Even though he was badly hurt, he understood what she was planning to do. "No," he whispered. "Too dangerous. You will die." Sujin smiled sadly and knelt down next to him. "Maybe," she said. "But if I do not try, we all die anyway. That is not acceptable." She told him about her brother and how he had sacrificed himself to warn other colonies about the Kalari attack. She explained that humans believed every life had value, no matter which side of a war they were born on. Even Kalari lives mattered, because all thinking beings deserved a chance to live and grow and maybe someday make better choices than their parents had made. "Your father loves you very much," she said. "I can see it in his eyes when he looks at you. That love is the same in humans and Kalari. It is what makes us more than just animals fighting over territory." Kilren tried to sit up, but his injuries were too severe. Tears ran down his gray cheeks. "Please," he said, "find another way. Your life is worth more than mine." Sujin shook her head. "No life is worth more than another. That is what makes us human." She moved him into a shielded alcove where the radiation could not reach him. The alcove had emergency supplies and an intercom system that would let him call for help when the life support systems came back online. "Tell your father what happened here," she said. "Tell him that humans are not monsters. We can choose to be better than our fear and anger." Sujin picked up her tools and walked into the radiation zone. The detector clicked faster and faster as she approached the damaged control panel. She could feel the radiation beginning to affect her body, making her sick and weak. But she had work to do, the most important work of her life. She began reconnecting cables and replacing damaged components, racing against time and radiation to save everyone aboard the ship. Her hands shook as the radiation poisoning spread through her body, but she did not stop working. Behind her, Kilren watched through the alcove window and learned what it really meant to be human. Sujin worked for 15 minutes in the radiation zone, reconnecting broken systems and replacing damaged parts. Her body was failing as the deadly energy poisoned her cells, but her hands remained steady. She had fixed thousands of machines. During her 15 years on spaceships, and muscle memory guided her even as her vision began to blur. The life support systems came back online with a deep humming sound that spread through the ship. Fresh air began flowing through the vents again. The water circulation resumed and the electrical system stabilized. Everyone aboard the Defiance could breathe safely once more. Sujin collapsed at the control panel, her tools scattered around, her radiation-burned hands. She had saved them all, but the cost was her life. The radiation damage was too severe for any medical treatment to help her now. In the shielded alcove, Kilren used the emergency intercom to call for help. His voice was weak but urgent as he spoke in both Kalari and human languages, trying to make someone understand what had happened. The first people to find them were human Marines who had been searching for survivors after the battle ended. They found Kilren injured but alive, and Sujin dying at her post with the manual controls still in her hands. Captain Park arrived minutes later with a medical team. He knelt beside Sujin and saw immediately that nothing could be done to save her. The radiation exposure had been too severe, but she was still conscious, still able to speak. "The ship," she whispered. "Is everyone safe?" "Yes," Captain Park said, his voice breaking. "The life support is working. You saved us all." Sujin smiled weakly and looked toward the alcove where Kilren was being treated by the medical team. "Take care of the boy," she said. "He is not our enemy, just someone's son who got caught in a war." More people arrived, including Commander Veltar and several other Kalari who had been freed during the rescue mission. The Kalari commander saw his injured son and rushed to his side. But when Kilren told him what Sujin had done, Veltar stopped and stared at the dying human woman. Kilren spoke rapidly in the Kalari language, telling his father everything that had happened. How Sujin had brought him food when he was sick, how she had climbed down to rescue him from the wreckage, how she had chosen to enter the radiation zone to save everyone on the ship, including her enemies. Commander Veltar listened to his son's words with growing amazement. In Kalari society, such sacrifice for enemies was considered impossible. Their military training taught that only your own people mattered, and showing mercy to opponents was a sign of weakness. But this human female had proven that belief wrong. She had given her life to save Kalari as well as humans, asking nothing in return except that people try to be better than their hatred. Veltar approached Sujin slowly. She was very weak now, but her eyes were still clear. "Human," he said, in careful words. "My son tells me what you did. Why save enemies?" Sujin looked at the tall Kalari commander and saw something she had not expected. His eyes held the same grief that human parents showed when their children were hurt. "Because your son is not my enemy," she said quietly. "He is just a young person who deserves a chance to live and choose his own path." Commander Veltar was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, softer. "In our language we have words for warrior and for enemy, but we do not have a word for what you are." "Human," Sujin replied. "Just human." The fighting throughout the ship had stopped when the life support systems came back online. Both human and Kalari soldiers had realized that something more important than their battle was happening. Word spread quickly about the janitor who had died saving everyone aboard. Captain Park called for an immediate ceasefire. Commander Veltar agreed, saying that honor demanded they stop fighting to acknowledge what Sujin had done. For the first time in 7 years of war, human and Kalari forces laid down their weapons and worked together. Sujin died 2 hours later, surrounded by both human and Kalari people who had come to pay their respects. Her last words were about her brother Teho, and how she hoped he would be proud of the choice she had made. Commander Veltar requested permission to carry her body back to human space personally. He wanted to tell other humans about her sacrifice, and make sure her story was not forgotten. Captain Park agreed, understanding that this was more than a military gesture. It was one father honoring someone who had saved his child. The news of Sujin's sacrifice spread through both human and Kalari fleets faster than any military communication. Human ships received the story with pride and sorrow, amazed that a janitor had shown more courage than any general. Kalari ships received it with confusion and wonder, struggling to understand why someone would die for their enemies. Young Kilren recovered from his injuries, but he was changed forever by what he had witnessed. When he returned to Kalari space with his father, he began speaking about the human who had saved him. He told other young Kalari that humans were not the monsters their government claimed they were. His words found listeners among Kalari who were tired of endless war. Some of them had lost family members in the fighting and wondered if there might be a better way to resolve their differences with humanity. The prisoner exchange that had been planned became something unprecedented. Representatives from both governments attended a joint ceremony honoring Sujin's sacrifice. For the first time since the war began, humans and Kalari stood together in respect rather than opposition. Commander Veltar spoke at the ceremony, describing how one human's choice to show mercy had taught him that the war was based on false beliefs about what each species represented. He announced that he was retiring from military service to work for peace between their peoples. 6 months later, the first real peace talks began. Both sides agreed to meet on a neutral station, with Kilren serving as a translator and Veltar representing Kalari who wanted to end the fighting. The talks were difficult and sometimes failed completely. But every time negotiations seemed hopeless, someone would remember the story of Lee Sujin, who had died to save enemies because she believed all thinking beings deserved compassion. A memorial garden was built on Earth where both human and Kalari children could come to learn about peace. Trees from both homeworlds grew together in soil mixed from planets that had once been battlefields. In the center of the garden stood a simple stone marker with words in both languages. Lee Soo-jin, Janitor, Hero, Bridge Between Worlds. The war officially ended 3 years after her death, when both governments signed a treaty calling for cooperation instead of conquest. The signing ceremony was held in the memorial garden, under trees that had grown tall enough to provide shade for children of both species playing together. Kilren, now grown to adulthood, often brought young Kalari visitors to the garden. He would tell them about the human woman who had taught him that true strength came not from destroying your enemies, but from choosing to see the good in them, even when they could not see it in themselves. The galaxy was still a dangerous place, and there were still conflicts between different species and governments. But the story of Soo-jin's sacrifice had planted seeds of hope that grew wherever people chose compassion over hatred. Her legacy lived on in every act of mercy, every choice to help rather than harm, every moment when someone decided that what connected all thinking beings was more important than what divided them. She had been just a janitor on a warship, invisible to most people around her. But her final choice had changed the course of history and proved that heroism could come from anywhere, as long as someone was willing to believe that every life mattered.